because of my expertise and my past involvement in administration, over the past couple of weeks, my dean asked me to facilitate the process of transitioning all our teaching online. In fact, from the day that the Greek government shut down all educational institutions in the country, I immediately jumped on the wagon and delivered my scheduled executive education seminars as scheduled, as intended, online. And it was a very complex undertaking because it involved a lot of simulations and videos and things like that, but it went very well. And on the base of that experience, we were able to transition all of our operations and teaching online within a few days. So I'm here to share that experience with you. This seminar is organized and brought to us by CEEMAN, the International Association for Management Development in Dynamic Societies. This is a global network with a global presence of individuals and institutions who pay attention to the diversity of local contexts in different countries and in different parts of the world, and how the local context impacts and reinforces management education. At Alba, we've had a long-standing and very productive relationship with CEEMAN. I find it one of the warmest and most active and interesting communities. CEEMAN is probably best known for its International Management Teachers Academy, but they also do all kinds of other events. And I'm particularly proud over the last few years to help deliver the workshop on EdTech, educational technologies. Speaking of which, you should not miss the upcoming webinar on videography using a smartphone. As we all transition online, we need to take increasingly care of our presence on digital media. And we have a lot to learn from the generation that has been doing this naturally for many years now on platforms like YouTube and many others. Now, before we move on to our subject, please make sure that you can hear me loud and well. You can see clearly the slides that I appear on your screens as intended. If you have performance issues with your hardware, consider turning off some other applications, or even, feel free to exit and re-enter. That's fine. That works well. Always keep in mind that the webinar is being recorded and will be distributed after the end of this live session. And of course, please do send your questions in the Q&A channel, which you will find at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we'll take some time toward the end to bring up and discuss some of those questions. If we have lots of questions, which I hope we do, then we will follow up with some other event or some other communication with as to any questions that we do not discuss in this live session. Now, what is the context of this discussion? The context of this discussion is that the whole world, the global economy, is under a process of forced digital transformation. Okay, this subject of digital transformation has been in academic discussions and in consultants' reports and in board of directors meetings for many years. And the vast majority of companies and countries, let's be honest, have been making very timid steps in that direction. But suddenly there is this urgency with this pandemic, and everybody needs to move online in a short period of time. And everybody is succeeding. Countries, companies, universities as well. In higher education, universities in most parts of the world are closed, and we need to move everything that we do online, pretty much everything except building security, campus security. So research, teaching, assessment, even examinations, graduations, all the operations, admissions, enrollment for next fall, for the next intakes. So it's a complex undertaking, and I'd be interested to find out exactly where you come from. What is your interest in this seminar? Are you primarily interested in transitioning your own teaching online, or in helping your instructors and professors transitioning online, or what is your interest? For this purpose, I will now share with you a short questionnaire, which you should see on your screens. Now, if you don't see it, you may have to enable pop-ups on your browser. Already, I'm getting lots and lots of answers here, which is great, and I will share with you the results in a moment. I mean, today's objective is to discuss teaching, right? I understand that the operations of a higher education department are quite complex also, and supporting the online teaching is perhaps a significant burden for the administration of a business school. But this is a whole different discussion altogether. Yeah, I've got 68% of those of you who participate who have made their choices, and I might as well share the results with you. Nearly 75% of you are interested to discuss what it takes to transfer our teaching online, and obviously we expected this. But the 34% of you who are interested in operations is more than a third of everybody, so it's a big proportion. I hope you will find the discussion today useful, but really the administrative side of things deserves special attention and a separate discussion. Okay, now the pandemic and the lockdown measures have been around for a while, and it is likely that some of you have already made the transition or are currently making it, or even some of you have been teaching online for a long period of time. So I want to ask my second question. What is your personal experience with online teaching? And my question here is more concrete, actually. What is your personal experience with synchronous live classes online rather than, video recorded classes? Let me share with you this questionnaire, and you should now be able to see it and respond to that. How long have you been involved in online teaching? Responses are coming in very fast. Thank you for your involvement and participation. Again, if you've been doing this for a while, you hopefully have also discovered many of the experiences that I'm going to be sharing with you. Hopefully what I'll be sharing with you will resonate with your experience. As you hopefully see the results, about a third, just over a third, 36% of you have just started going online since the lockdown, which is a result of the COVID pandemic. 29%, nearly 30% of you have none experience whatsoever. And something like 35%, 36% of you have been doing it for a while. All right, so excellent. I hope that those of you with no experience will ask lots of questions in the Q&A section. And those of you with more experience will also share your experience in the Q&A section. And I will try to pick up some of those contributions to share with everybody. Now, let's be honest. Very often, the first thing that comes to mind when we're talking about transitioning online, especially under an urgent crisis, is what kind of tools are we going to use? What kind of technologies are we going to use? This is an important question. Okay, this is an important question because to those of us with no prior experience, it gives us a sense of certainty, and we can then start searching about it, discovering, figuring out how to organize our work, etc. But it is not ultimately the most important question. Okay, the most important question has to do with how I organize my material, my teaching performance, and so on, which is the subject I'm going to come to right away. I just want to emphasize at this point that our focus in this webinar is the situation that we're in right now. Okay, how do I transition my current classes, programs, students who need to finish and graduate online, given the fact I don't have a lot of time to redesign my programs. It's not about launching a new online program. It's not about redesigning my syllabi and my curricula for online delivery. It's about making a rapid transition. And this involves primarily transposing the classroom experience on the web, which means synchronous and interactive teaching. And we will also require the support more reliance on asynchronous tools, and I have a few words to say about that as well. Obviously, this involves a lot of operational support, but as I said, this is the subject of another discussion. Now, for the sake of this, technology anxiety, if I can call it that, I'm curious to find out, and I'm sure many of you are also curious to find out, what kinds of tools have you used or you are considering to use. So please, I hope you can see this questionnaire now and you can start answering. And let's see, which way this group of people is moving, in which way direction this group of people is moving. We have about over 170 participants in this webinar, and I'm grateful that you are all taking part. Lots of answers coming in very fast. So a variety of decisions. Maybe you have not made your decision yet, which is also fine. And I guess hopefully some of the discussion we're gonna have here is going to help you, set the criteria for making your own choices. Now, some of you may have issues not seeing the poll, perhaps. This is probably a technical matter. Don't worry about it. I will always be narrating the results of those polls, and you will be able to hear of it in the recording of the webinar. So almost 70% of you said some other tool than those that I have listed. 45% are using Microsoft Teams. I assume that your school or university has Office 365, and this is a default option there. And then, there's 10%, 11% is using WebEx by Cisco, and less than 10% are using Adobe Connect, Big Blue Button, Blackboard Collaborate, Slack, or others. Okay. Right. So as we start considering what do we do, how we start transitioning, we need to rethink what is the challenge ahead of us, right? So we start with the premise of transposing the classroom experience to the online environment. If you've been teaching for many years, I assume most of you have been doing so, then there are many things that we take for granted. For example, we enter the room, we close the door behind us, and we have full command of the students' attention, what is happening, what is allowed, what is not allowed in the room. Online, students are most likely at home. At home, they have many more distractions. Families, children, pets, in-laws, other things happening at home in the neighborhood or on their computer. Their attention span is a lot shorter. The medium is not as warm as face-to-face interaction. It's a colder, cooler medium. So we have to try harder to win and sustain the attention of our audience. And this transition also reminds us that teaching is not about, data transfer, transferring information knowledge from our brains to the brains of our students. We teach in the classroom or in another setting because the performance makes a difference, right? And we're now on a virtual stage, on an online stage. And things are different. We have opportunities to do some things in a lot more efficient and effective way, but obviously there are constraints and challenges that suddenly we cannot take for granted. We have to think through, right? Now, in the classroom, we command our computers and PowerPoints and projectors and flip charts and whiteboards and everything. Here we have a bunch of tools that we need to juggle simultaneously as we deliver our teaching. And initially, this is going to be a little bit awkward. It's not going to come naturally to us in the same way that we feel comfortable in a classroom. But believe me, with a little bit of experience, after a few hours of teaching, it'll become second nature to you. And I hope those of you who have had such experience can confirm this. It's a learning curve, but if you make a little bit of progress, then you will acquire a feeling similar to being in the classroom. Now, as we try to transition online, we need to consider our audiences, right? Class size, where are our students, what is their time zones, age, at what level are we teaching? Are we teaching undergraduates or executive education students? Big difference in terms of how we prepare, how do we deliver, what kinds of expectations we have and they have. Perhaps technological constraints, if they're relevant, even though the technologies are relatively, trivial nowadays. And most important of all, what is the motivation and the expectations of our students and audiences? And this is perhaps a little bit more difficult to gauge in an impersonal context like this. So we have to purposefully try to elicit that information. Class size is important. It's easier to do an interactive meeting with 30 or 40 or 50 people, and it's a lot harder when you have a class of 100 or 400 or 500. It's equally difficult in the amphitheater if you have a very large audience. Online, it's a little bit more awkward and complex because you cannot have an instant view of what is happening in the audience at any moment in time like you do in a physical amphitheater. All right, so next step, we need to adapt our material, right? Now, the first thing that you will realize as soon as you do your first lecture online is that you need to reduce your ambition. You need your ambition not in terms of the standards of quality that you set. Those have to be set very high and can be sustained at a very high level online. Your ambition in terms of the amount of material you want to deliver. Time flies a lot faster online for a number of reasons. And I'm going to mention a few of them later on. So you really need to slash the amount of material you intend to deliver in a synchronous session. Not 10%, it's not only 10%, it's a lot more than that, okay? Then, as I said earlier, in order to capture and sustain the attention of your audience, you need to inject a lot more interactivity than you probably would in a classroom setting. One of the best ways to do that is to use breakout rooms if your platform supports breakout rooms. My general advice would be to avoid long lecture monologues. If you have to do something like that, then you're better off recording it as a video and putting it on your LMS, Blackboard or Canvas or something else. And finally, it takes perhaps a little bit more preparation than you would for your classroom teaching, because you really need to inject a rhythm, a pace in your teaching plan. You have to alternate, you have to move from one activity to the next. You cannot let a discussion carry on for too long. You cannot let a piece of lecture carry on for too long. In order to, again, to sustain the interest and attention of your audience, you have to have pace. You have to move on at the regular intervals. And this is something you cannot do on the fly. You have to plan for it in advance. You have to inject it into your teaching plan. And there is nothing that you cannot do online, right? You can do lectures, and we will do lectures, even though the longer versions of our lectures need to be broken up into smaller segments or have to go as a video somewhere else. You can do notes, you can do annotations, you can do whiteboarding using digital tools or using a camera and a flip chart. Case study discussion. Most tools support vivid interactivity. Breakout groups, I mentioned that. You can ask your students, do your group presentations in a live online classroom setting. You can have guest speakers. in your online class. You can do simulations. That was my first online class, and it went very well, and students appreciate it. You can do role plays, co-teaching. For some people, co-teaching adds more complexity. For others, it actually takes away from the complexity of juggling and coordinating all the technology and the tools that you have in front of you. You can go even further than that. You can do creative activities. I mean, obviously, if you're doing, for example, Lego exercises, you cannot have a group of students building the same Lego construction, but you can think creatively about how you transpose creative activities online, and there's probably a lot you can do there. The same with performative activities. I mean, you've probably seen those videos that have circulated on social media about orchestras, for example. Each member of the orchestra playing their own instrument, and then a video editor puts everything all together in one composition. That can work as well. And of course, assessment. Project work, essays, things like that are obviously going to work well online. You can also grade for participation. Because first of all, most platforms, especially those platforms that are specifically intended for academic purposes, they offer all kinds of data reporting, analytics about, when students came in, when they left, their attention, and so on and so forth. But you can also, use your own judgment, your own cold calls, perhaps, in order to assess participation. Now, exams, supervised, proctored exams is a different story altogether. But there are tools for that as well, okay? There are specialist tools and service providers that can do proctored exams over a distance online. Now, obviously, each one of those bullet points merits a lengthy discussion, and I'm not gonna go any deeper to any of those right now, but I'm happy to answer specific questions that you may have. Please post them in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window. Okay, so we've adapted our content. Now we have to adapt our teaching habits. All right. So as I said, we take it for granted that we walk in the classroom and we engage in our performance without overthinking it. Without we focus on the substance of our teaching rather than the performance of our teaching. But now that we move to a new medium, a new channel, new tools, we have to be a lot more deliberate about how we organize our own self-presentation. Now, obviously, sound is our most important tool, the most important tool that we have, because this is how we communicate. But also, remember, we want to recreate the engagement and community that we have in a classroom environment. And this means we have to enhance as much as possible our sense of presence. And this is why video is so important. Your video, my video as an instructor, but also the videos of my students. I want my students as much as possible to have their cameras on so that we can all look at each other and engage as much as possible in a more in a way that approximates the real thing. Okay, so lighting, staging, one's presence is important. One way to do this, is to go and find your favorite YouTubers. They're probably a lot younger, and they've been doing this for a long time, and observe how they perform on screen, and choose and copy the performers or the elements of performance that you like, right? And then we have to practice how to orchestrate, the polls and the chat rooms and the whiteboards and this and that. And this takes a little bit of practice. In the end of the day, I would say that you have to make sure that you simplify your technology environment as much as you need. You don't have to have a really high-tech teaching environment to deliver an effective online class. Or you can add complexity if you think that this empowers your delivery. It's your personal teaching, it's your personal performance, and it has to be reflective of what you think is important, of how you want to project yourself to your students, the knowledge that you want to impart to them, the kind of critical thinking, analysis, whatever it is that you want to convey. All right. And most tools will give you superpowers, like turning on all cameras or turning off the cameras or muting the microphones or unmuting the microphones, and don't hesitate to use them, because this is how you add, this is how you control this virtual environment. This is how you create a space where at one moment you want everybody to jump in and shout out their opinion, and another moment you want a clear channel where you explain something difficult and complex. Delivery. You have to make yourself comfortable as much as possible. You have a lot to do, you have a lot to take care of, so try to make your environment as comfortable as possible. Make space for mishaps. Expect that things will, some things will go wrong on your side, on your student side. So this is natural, your students' children will come along in front of the screen, your children will come along, your pets, something's going to happen outside in the street, there's going to be noise, there's going to be interruption. This is fine. You're going to, you're going to miss, you're going to confuse your windows on your screen. This is also fine. Now, here's a tip though, because your audience cannot see what is happening outside this frame, if you drop your mouse on the floor, they won't know what's going on, right? So you constantly have to narrate what is happening. So you might say, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my PowerPoint window. Let me see where I can find it. Oh, and where did my computer disappear? With my, this Excel spreadsheet I had here, I wanted to show you something, I cannot find it. Give me a moment. This is absolutely fine, and you should expect this to happen, and you should be relaxed about it. Alternate delivery modes in short intervals. Every 7 minutes, every 10 minutes, maximum 15, and that's probably too long. You have to switch from discussion to lecture to exercise to group work onto something else. It's the rhythm and pace that I mentioned earlier. Attention spans are short online, okay? Signposting and summaries. You may be doing it already in your classroom. You have to be more deliberate about it here online. You have to signpost the process of your delivery. We now completed this. Let me give you a summary of that. And we're now going to move on to another subject. Now I explained to you how to solve these kinds of problems. Let us now do an exercise in groups. All right. It helps give structure in a medium which, as I said, is rather cold, cool. Our objective is to engage, to retain attention, but also to engage the commitment of students to our subject and our interaction online. That's for the synchronous interactive class, right? We also need to rely on our asynchronous tools. You probably use Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, Slack, Microsoft Teams, not only for conferencing, but also for document sharing, collaboration, discussion, right? Okay, so here's the thing. On campus, when we meet at the building, we have lots of opportunities to interact with one another. Before the class, during a break, after the class, at the cafeteria, at the corridor. These are all opportunities to ask a clarification, I have a problem, this thing you were discussing, Professor, earlier, I'm facing this at work, what do you think I should be doing? This is the sort of thing that doesn't necessarily happen during class time, okay? But when we're online, students are very unlikely to sit down and write an email about this sort of thing. This is the kind of quasi-random interaction that happens if there is an opportunity, okay? So if we think about it, there is a lot that we miss when we move away from this face-to-face interaction, okay? So we would like to create some opportunities to recapture some of that. And one way to do it is to use our asynchronous tools, discussion forums, things like that. Obviously, you can use those tools for guided engagement with the teaching material, like the case studies and contests that you may have with your students, or group project, things like that. But also for informal interaction, on the boundaries of the course content, things that have to do with current affairs, how does the exponential evolution of the pandemic related to the exponential evolution of technology, for example, things like that, that may or may not be part of your class. Tangential topics have to do with the student's own experience or work. So let's create an informal channel for such serendipitous, irregular interaction. Okay. Finally, you may want to record those online sessions, or you may choose not to. I mean, recording is very useful for many reasons, and we all understand that. But what we want to avoid is we want to avoid giving students an incentive to skip the class and rely on the recording, because it beats the purpose. Okay, either would do real-time interactive class sessions because for the purpose of engaging in interactivity in real time, or if we're not if we're not going to do that, then we might as well record the lectures, post it online, then go to an offline discussion forum and answer questions, or do case study Q&A or something, right? But the purpose of going online in synchronous class interaction is to reinforce and replicate that engagement. Okay, so we have to be careful how we use the recording. On the other hand, if you have a large class with, say, 10 or 15 teams of students doing some kind of group work, and you have student group presentations, these can be tedious. And if they are tedious in the classroom, they're even more tedious online. So there is an opportunity to ask your group, your students, to actually record their group presentation in a small video production, 10 minutes, whatever the instruction is, the same, which can be shared with everybody. And then demand, in one way or another, that everybody, all students, watch those group presentations and come to the synchronous interactive online session to discuss, to debate, to criticize, to provide feedback, to ask questions, and so on. So this is, one of the many ways in which you can reinforce the interactivity, engagement, and community of the opportunities that you have with an online real-time class, and minimize or move to another asynchronous channel those elements that do not contribute directly to that interactivity and engagement. Right. Another thing that very often we perhaps obsess about sometimes is what kind of equipment I have to invest in. I mean, we're in a crisis. I don't want to spend money I cannot afford, probably. So the thing to remember here is, what is the purpose of investing in equipment if we're going to do that, all right? So the main purpose is to enable the kind of teaching that we need. And obviously things are very different if you're teaching, I don't know, organizational behavior versus statistics and economics, yeah? The subject matter imposes certain requirements or constraints. The other element that we always have in the back of our mind is that we want to project a vivid and engaging performance in our real-time sessions, okay? So let's be clear, you can go all the way to a very high state-of-the-art, cameras and stuff, and build a home studio if you want, but you can also do it just with the laptop that you have, and it'll work, Most tools do not need anything more than a modern laptop, right? Most conferencing tools. Now, as you move on and as you gather experience, most people would probably agree that you need a large monitor so that you arrange the different applications that you'll be using, and you can monitor simultaneously your PowerPoints, your chat rooms, and polls, and whatever else. You can use your home TV if it's a relatively recent model, and it'll probably work in the same way. You don't have to go out and buy a monitor. Now, optional, a better camera, a better microphone, perhaps the lighting, perhaps the background, like I've done here. These are all optional things. And what you need to always keep in mind is, what do I want my students to see? right? I want them to focus perhaps on my facial expressions, not too close, not too far, but I want to use my expression to convey the importance, the urgency, the distinctiveness of my ideas, okay? So this is why I perhaps want a better camera. This is why perhaps I want a little bit of better lighting, okay? Now, perhaps more substantively, think about this. You may actually want to have like a tablet or a smartphone next to you. Say you rely a lot on whiteboarding, writing on the whiteboard, right? And your laptop does not support that, but some tablets are not too expensive and they have a stylus and you can use that, right? Or you don't want to do that. You want to keep it simple and low tech. You use a paper flip chart or a whiteboard if you have a proper, pen whiteboard if you have at home, and you can use your smartphone camera as a second member, as a co-teacher, or as a participant in your meeting. That actually transfers the image from your whiteboard. Simple, low tech, low cost solution. You may want to have a device like this simply to keep an eye on what the students are seeing, and if your PowerPoint is projected properly, if you're actually sharing your spreadsheet, or if things work as intended. So these are little things that help solve common problems when we go online. But as I said, one can start right away with a simple laptop. Now, my final comment is this. We are under a lot of pressure to carry on with our educational mission and meet the expectations of our students, especially those who are near graduation or who, without disrupting the flow of studies for the university and for our students, okay? And we want to use those online tools in order to transpose our classroom experience. And as soon as we go online, and as soon as we start thinking about the effectiveness of our teaching, we realize that what we've been doing all along in the classroom is not only verbally explaining a theory or a methodology or a model or a framework, but actually using our entire physical presence in the space of a classroom with various media, like the whiteboard, the projector, other things, in order to impress on our students the significance of the distinctions that we're trying to emphasize. All right. So when we go online, it is not about reciting a PowerPoint. It is not only about reciting a PowerPoint. It is not only about showing the formulas. It is about recreating that sense of community. It is about capturing, sustaining the attention of students, and it's about winning their commitment to our joint endeavor, this collective effort in the class, in the virtual class, to conquer a piece of knowledge, a piece of new knowledge. All right. So even though a lot of our effort is on how do I show this my spreadsheets, how do I explain my formulas, how do I convey my theory. So even though a lot of our time and effort goes into wrestling with our material, our ultimate objective is to maximize this opportunity to re-engage the learning community in our classrooms. Okay, so this is a summary of my experience, having tried to do it myself for my own teaching and having tried to help all of my colleagues at the business school at home to transition everything online. And we've done it successfully since last week. And I hope you have now posted a number of questions that I'm going to have a look at. In the meantime, I would also like to ask you whether you found this seminar useful, and whether you'd be interested in in a more in-depth workshop, getting into more details in some of these subjects. So you should now be able to see this poll, this questionnaire, and provide your answers while I have a look at your questions and try to identify some for discussion. Okay, so a few questions here. Let's see, let's start from the top. Some of you like this screen. It's a feature of Zoom, the platform that we're using right now. Other platforms use similar tools. In order to optimize the visual appeal of that, I have installed a green screen behind me, just like a green sheet, bed sheet, because I teach lots of hours. What I would, Irina says, I would be interested to know what other tools you're using for online teaching. At my school, we use Zoom. As far as I'm concerned, I also rely on Microsoft Teams a lot, not for the conferencing side of things. I'm using conferencing to meet students in small groups, perhaps, or individually, because it's easy. But I rely a lot on the discussion structure, the channels in Teams for asynchronous collaboration, sharing, and exercises with my students, and I rely a lot on that. I like the built-in whiteboard that Zoom has, but I find that other purpose-built whiteboard utilities work better with my tablet laptop, and I use those. I don't use anything else, not for the time being. Here's another thing. Platforms like Zoom and WebEx and others, they support simple polls, simple questionnaires. If you want to share something more, if you want to ask something more complex with your students, then you probably need to use something like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or something else, right? And again, you can share the link that takes students there and the results. Christina, what was your question specifically on that slide? For polling, Marco, I'm using the built-in tool that Zoom has. Examples of creative activities. I mean, in my teaching, I've been using Lego a lot of the time. Other colleagues are doing other things like performative elements that have to do with, with a certain performance individually or in groups, or using plasticine or other, or doing collages or things like that. And they're used in executive education as much as they're used in undergraduate teaching or master's programs and MBA programs. What is a breakout room? Yeah. So when we teach on campus, a lot of the time we are in the main amphitheater or classroom, and we will break students in groups and send them into their study rooms to do some kind of exercise, and then come back to the main lecture room to report the results, right? You can do this with some of the online teaching platforms like WebEx, Blackboard Collaborate, Adobe Connect, Zoom, I'm not sure of others. They support this facility. And it's actually a lot more efficient when you do it online, because you don't waste time walking from one room to the next. It happens instantaneously. You can visit each group where they're doing their work. They can call you if they have a question or they need advice. Obviously, this kind of activity requires preparation, requires planning. It requires that you give them very specific instructions, very concrete deliverables, and you tell them exactly, how to organize their work, how to use the facilities, the utilities that the software allows them to use, and what they need to do during their group work and after that. Stefka, grading features. So what I have in mind is not grading features. So if you're using Blackboard, for example, or Canvas, and you structure your assessments there, this is where you can do the grading on the platform. I'm talking about proctored examinations. So there are some solutions out there. I don't mean to advertise any, but and we have not, back in my school, we have not adopted any of those yet. But the main model in all those solutions, more or less, is that the student has to download a piece of software, which does a few things. First, and they take the exam at home, right? Students take the exam at home. They don't have to go to a testing center or to the university. So they're at home with their computer. The software locks up everything on the computer. The student cannot access any other program on the computer except the test questions that appear on the interface. The software also manages the timing, the duration, and all the parameters that the professor wants to set. And the system also requires that the student has a webcam that is used for a number of purposes: authentication, that I am the student you expect to take this course, not someone else on behalf of the student. And also the webcam has to be set in a way that monitors what's happening on my environment so that I don't use my smartphone, I don't have some other person over there talking to me, and so on. Yeah. This is the general idea. Different platforms or service providers implement this model in different ways. Yes, how do you encourage students to turn the camera on? Well, that's a very good question, and I don't have a definitive answer. I repeat it, and I try to give them opportunity to become engaged in a more lively manner. So I've noticed, for example, and maybe some of you have noticed as well, that when they go into breakout rooms, then everybody opens their cameras because they're in a small group and they want to have a little bit of fun and tell a few jokes at the same time, as well as doing the tasks that I have assigned them. So why do they do it in a small group environment and they don't do it in the plenary, let's say, virtual class? We can imagine that there may be all kinds of reasons for behaving in that way. A lot of the time what I do is I open up all the microphones and I ask them to just jump in with their ideas. I do this kind of short, kind of all hands on deck, all voices on the channel, contribute, participate. And this makes things a little bit more lively, makes students a little bit more relaxed to begin with, less self-conscious about how they present themselves. They may be on their sofa, lying back or something. I want them to, engage, stand up, participate. So I'm pretty sure that I will never have more than, 60, 70% of my students in any class opening their cameras. But if I can have like more than a third, maybe half, I'll be happy. Andre, you want an insider view of my home background solution? Yeah, so this is a green screen, but it's a cheap one. It's like very cheap. Yeah. Right. So case study discussion. Then it's a little bit more preparation. So there are a number of, you can use all of the techniques that you know how to use in the classroom, right? So you can do role play. You have a case study and you have, let's say, the entrepreneur and the investor, or the manager and the subordinate, whatever. And you can assign those roles and you can ask them to role play them. It is best if either you assign those roles in advance of the class, or if you allocate some time to the students to work on it during the class, preferably in advance, unless it's a group work, which they can do during your online session. Yes, cold calling works, but because your students are at home with their camera off and they may be, filling up their coffee mug or, coordinating with their spouses or wives or children, or, closing the window, not being on screen at the moment, but they're listening. Their speakers are on, they may have a headset on. You tell them, Andre, after this, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to tell us your opinion on this problem. Yeah. And so the question carries on, and then it is Andre's turn, and then you say, Mike, after Andre is done, then I want to turn to you. So it is, lukewarm calling, not entirely cold calling, because you want to bring that person back into the fold because they're in their own context, they're only in a physical classroom, they're on to other things. Oral exams online. I'm sure, yeah, you have the same problems as with written exams, let's be honest, because you do not control the environment where the student is. And, you have no idea what's behind my camera. You have no idea what's on my screen. You have no idea what's in front of me. So I can answer your oral exam questions, but it's difficult to supervise the process. So again, we fall back into the same set of problems that we have with written exams. And even though I don't have experience with oral exams, let me be honest with that, I imagine that the challenge is the same and the solution has to be very similar. What type of training do you suggest we get to be effective in online teaching? I'm not sure exactly what you have in mind, Shamila. As I said, there are two, let's say, demands or constraints that I have in the back of my mind. One is that we need to transition online ASAP, right, because of the pandemic and the crisis. We do not have the luxury of time to plan for long periods of time or to redesign our curricula and our syllabi and deliver online courses. Okay, that's number one. Number two, we want as much as possible to use the opportunity that tools like this one give us to make it interactive, engaging, rebuild the community, right? So what I try to do with my classes is either break down my lecturing into small nuggets, 7 minutes each, and then interpolate those with some kind of interactive exercise, discussion, group work, right? Or take away much of my heavyweight lecturing into a video, a recorded video, or a recorded screencast if it's something that has to do with spreadsheets, something interactive, right? And I post it on our LMS. And then I ask students, before you come to class, make sure you've watched this. And when we come to class, we engage in criticism, discussion, and so on. So this is the way I see things. This is ideal. Now, I recognize that, when the government lockdown was switched on, you were ready to take your laptop, your PowerPoint, whatever you're using, walk into the classroom and deliver a lecture, right? And suddenly, within a matter of days, you are asked to do the same thing online. So you probably do not have enough time to do this adjustment that I'm describing here. This is absolutely fine. You can start doing exactly what you do offline, but then hopefully, little by little, as you acquire more and more experience with technology, the tools, with the kind of feedback that you're getting from students, little by little, you start calibrating and adjusting your teaching. And hopefully, having attended this webinar, hopefully, you have some potential ideas in the back of your mind that you can gradually start implementing. Polls and feedback, yeah, most apps do it, but even if it's not built into the platform that you're using, then you might as well use something like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or whatever it is that you're using, and it's equally fine. Yeah, regarding the second device, most of the time you need to have well, it depends what it is. So most of the time you probably need to have a second account onto the conferencing platform that you're using, Konstantina, in order to connect a second tablet or a second smartphone for some other purpose. Now, if it's a purpose-built tablet for drawing and writing, like a Wacom tablet, this is designed to be connected to the same PC that does the the meeting, right? So again, it depends on what devices you choose. Resources for the future. That's a very good question. If you Google it online, there are lots and lots of resources. Harvard Business School has come out with a dedicated microsite with such resources. Most academic publishers also have similar online resources. You'll find lots of blog posts. I think it's more important to work with your colleagues at your department or business school or university and discover, how you're going to pool your resources in your university. If you operate in a context of a bigger university, it is likely that you have a group of people who do instructional design, they're looking after pedagogical methods, right? So I imagine that they have taken on this challenge to provide support to professors and faculty in that direction. Again, your university or business school may have already made some technology platform choices. Like you're on Blackboard, you're likely to use Blackboard Collaborate, or you do something else, right? So again, you follow their guidance. And then it is also very likely that someone in your department or business school is an early adopter of these things, right? Like I was in my business school. And therefore, these are your colleagues who who have been able to jump on to this new teaching approach earlier than others, acquire some early experience within the context of your own department, of your own business school, of your own country, your own students, and the particularities that this context has, which are not the same as mine or somebody else's, right? And then they can give you targeted support and advice, okay? Because in the end of the day, you have to find a solution that is workable rapidly and satisfies the expectations of your university, your faculty, and your students in your local context as soon as possible. And even though the tools are universal, the advice that I've given you is probably also universal. The way you pick and mix all those components and you create a solution for your own business school is probably unique, right, to your context. Yes, I have experienced that kind of engagement. I have, and I consider myself very lucky that my students responded to that, right? Now, I'm pretty sure that in the future, I will come across audiences and groups that will be more reticent, more resistant, and I know of colleagues who have faced this kind of problem, and they had to try harder. And one of the things that we discussed was to return the challenge to the students in some degree. That's a very interesting question. So instead of going with a predefined course plan or lecture plan, carry with you the components of what you want to teach, but then probe the students to discover what is it that they want to take away as a learning experience from that session, right? And then improvise by responding to what grabs the attention of your students by picking and mixing from the material that you have prepared, rather than as opposed to sort of following your standard recipe, beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so this is a little bit more radical, perhaps a little bit more risky, perhaps a little bit more stressful and difficult, but I know that it has worked miracles with a very close friend and colleague of mine who recently faced this problem where participants were resistant to engage. Okay, so I have lots more questions and I haven't been able to scroll down the entire list. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for staying till the end. I promise to go through this list. Remember, you will receive the recording, you will receive the slides, and you will receive further announcements from CEEMAN as to follow-up sessions like this, where we will have the opportunity to dive into your questions and more details on the subjects that I covered today. I hope that you gained something from this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit. And I also hope to see you again in another CEEMAN event or in another online event. Thanks very much again.